Great. So, yeah, first of all, Magdalena, so great to speak to you. I absolutely loved the short. Um, to start off, can you just talk about how the opportunity came to Aardman and then by extension how it came to you specifically?
Mhm. So about 2 years ago, Lucasfilms approached Aardman about making a short, but the brief was Star Wars meets Aardman. So it was, quite broad. And then Aardman asked quite a few creators, directors, and writers to pitch their ideas. So I think there was quite a lot of us to start. Then there was a short list of 4 or 5, and then there was a painful waiting. Who is going to be selected, and yeah, and so they selected "I'm Your Mother." I wrote initially, I think, about 3 ideas, but this one, "I Am Your Mother," was the first thing that came to my mind, because I was thinking, what is it that I love about Star Wars? And I love the creatures and the visual world and the politics as well, but the relationships, and that's something that definitely draws me in. And "I'm Your Father" line. So it was quite a basic, just start of the concept. I'm your father, and because I'm a mother now, I constantly think about myself, and I wanted to think about myself as a mother, not about myself. uh, to tell a story about mother-daughter relationship. Yeah.
Yeah, so that was always at the core of what you wanted to do with this one. In those other ideas, did you ever think about going for a bigger scale, or was it always something more personal and small?
Actually, all of them were uh, quite personal and small, actually, or inspired by something that happened to me or someone who I know. I think I tend to go this way, to always base stories on something that I know that's quite close to me. And I found it quite exciting as well to try and, as a kind of concept experiment, try and put the story that's very familiar to me into Star Wars and Aardman universe and see how it works. But I think to me that it works, that kind of way of writing the story and starting with an idea, because if you start, I think, with emotions, something relatable, it's you can in a way put it in every kind of universe and make it work.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I like how you mentioned that it's inspired by real stories because the story itself does feel kind of like anecdotal. Like I get the sense it's like Annie 20 years in the future recounting like a happy memory of doing something with her mom. So do you kind of have like an analog for that in your own life or inspired by someone else that you know that directly inspired the story?
Yeah, so this was very much inspired by my mom, the whole story. At the time of writing this story as well, I was going through looking for primary schools for my son, here in the UK, and kind of realizing that things are working a little bit differently to how it works in Poland. It's all very much postcode related, and I got quite actually obsessed about the whole primary school selection and how it's going to affect secondary and all of his education basically. And then I was thinking about my mom, because this is once I became a mother myself, I think about my mom a lot as well, and I understand her much better now as well. So I was thinking how she's always been very motivating, and even though that we come from this maybe not a very privileged part of Warsaw in Poland, she would always say, you can do it, you can go to great schools, and education is going to take you place. So it was a really important thing for her, always very motivating, always very giving. But when I was younger, I don't think I appreciated her enough in a way. And I think this is normal as when we are kids, that we don't, see the sacrifices that our parents make. Um, so I really wanted it to be like, this story about a girl who, appreciates her mom and everything that she taught her. and that a lot of the talent that she's got actually comes from her mom, and she sees it at the story.
Yeah, and was there like an intentional kind of class commentary here? Because like the main characters have a northern UK accent, and the main villains of the story are very posh British accents. So is that quite an intentional discrepancy you're trying to do that?
Yeah, it was definitely. I wanted them to feel different, to feel alien, and that's why deliberately they are also alien species, and that was again inspired by the way how I felt, years ago, moving to this country, or when how my mom feels when she visits us, but also the fact that we did come from. My dad used to work in a factory, so we used to be also a working class family. So it was just that kind of feeling of not fitting into the environment exactly, and coming to terms with this and gaining confidence. I really wanted, both elements of class. But I think the class is actually, it's just class that is coming across much more in the film rather than, coming from a different planet. There was no space in the film if we have half an hour, we'd probably make that work. And yes, I was very keen to have the two main characters in the cast to relate to these roles as well. So Maxine, who's from a working class and she's got a Mancunian accent. I thought she was perfect for this. And Charithra Chandran for Anni, who can also really relate to the story, because she when we had our first chat, she said, I relate to this so much because it's exactly how I felt with my mom, and her having different cultural references and different music, and how much maybe when she was younger, she felt it made them stand out, but actually this is something she really appreciates now. So I was really keen to, for the cast to feel close to the characters as well.
Absolutely, yeah. I noticed in the credits that Annie's name is a lot longer than Annie. Could you first let me know what the proper pronunciation is of Annie's full first name?
Oh, Anni Sukalin.
Annie
That's
Suklin. Okay, so could you tell me where that came from? Yeah.
well, it just came from that so Anni Sukalin. There is Annie and Kalin in a way. So that basically that
Ah,
is
yeah, that
so
makes
that
sense.
Annie that came from Kalina. So to give into that name the fact, like, you came from her, she's your mother, you can't avoid it that your character traits come from her, and your greatness come from her as well. Yeah.
Right, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That's pretty cool. Um, so you mentioned at the start how the initial brief was just Aardman meets Star Wars, and I think a lot of people, when it was first announced that you guys would be doing this, was quite shocked because the aesthetic of Star Wars and the aesthetic of Aardman don't immediately line up. So could you talk about how you made that work? Because it definitely works in the short.
Mm. Yeah, so first of all, I was thinking that the thing that links Star Wars and Aardman are the relationships, and quite often the main character being some kind of, fish out of water, maybe a bit of an underdog. So to me, that was like an obvious thing. And then the second thing was that I was so excited about making Star Wars in stop motion style, and I was just crossing my finger. I hope we can make the Star Wars world in miniature, because artistically it was just an amazing opportunity, and I honestly couldn't sleep when I heard about that. And uh, also because in the original trilogy there are some stop motion elements, right, animated by the legendary Phil Tippett. So yeah, the attacks and the chess sequence and the tauntauns. So I thought it was a really nice kind of, going back to the roots for Star Wars. And I thought it's a perfect marriage, Star Wars and stop motion. So yeah, to me there were these two elements that were like an obvious link. On a very basic level, the relationships and the main characters, I could definitely find similarities, and yeah, the technique making this incredible universe and the galaxy in stop motion. It was very exciting.
Did you have kind of like a Star Wars checklist, like little details from Star Wars that you love that you definitely wanted to include ahead of time?
There was lots of things I wanted to include actually, but I didn't have any. Yeah, just imagining the sets and the spaceships, and actually the costumes as well. So there was a lot in there. And we've got such a variety of different, we've got the production designer and the art director, they were just dreaming of making a spaceship and the cockpit and the living area, because that feels very Star Wars. So we've got that of the space tag. There's a whole backstory actually for the space tag as well. I can tell you that in a second.
Please do.
And yeah. There is the school and the whole market. There is plenty of Star Wars details in the market as well, and the tunnel, that was a very exciting set as well. So yeah, I think I got very excited about making the sets and the spaceship and the puppet, and so with the costumes as well. In Aardman we usually make the costumes would be latex, most likely.
Mm-hmm.
And I love the kind of texture and detail of Star Wars costumes. And I was really keen to do that and be very specific about colors. I pay a big attention to colors and how they, what kind of role in storytelling they play as well. But so that they feel very textured and more Star Warsy than Aardman. So I would choose some things I think are really good for this story from Aardman style and from Star Wars, and try to combine it together. So with the tugboat, with the space tag, that spaceship was specifically designed. It's a new spaceship that we designed because some other spaceships were inspired by other Star Wars spaceships. So this one was meant to be like a kind of a flying caravan. And we had a whole backstory to start with, that Anni and Kalina come from this fishing planet, very, very far away. And that Kalina's, as well as their home, it's also her working spaceship. So tugboats in our real life, they are these small boats that lead big ships into the harbor. And they are small but powerful. So that was meant to be a metaphor for Kalina as well, that she is leading Anni through life, and she is small and powerful. And even the colors of the tugboat relate to Kalina's colors. They are kind of yellow and red as well. Yeah.
One thing that's like core to Aardman is obviously like the Britishness, and I feel like just with the story itself being so small and personal, that's like a unique thing for Star Wars. It's also unique for Star Wars to have Mancunian accents. I'm really struggling to remember the last time I heard one in Star Wars, but also like this idea of like a primary school sports day kind of feel. So could you talk about like the main setting for the story?
Yeah, exactly. So I think a lot of Star Wars films, they've got this some kind of slightly absurd British tradition, like the vegetable growing competition, right? And I remember I watched this film back in Poland, and I thought that it wasn't even a real thing. Only when I moved to the UK, I was like, oh, okay, they actually have a vegetable growing competition. So I was keen for something like this, in some kind of a tradition that's slightly absurd, and more specific to the UK, because I don't remember having that kind of sports day like there is in the UK, with the egg and spoon competition and the jumping in the sacks and that kind of stuff. And it being quite competitive, even though it's supposed to be fun and for kids. But but I did read some articles, and actually from like headmasters as well online, saying the parents next year, they won't be able to race anymore because there's been too many kind of aggressive incidents. So I thought that this was very suitable, this kind of absurd thing, and how can we, make this in the Star Wars universe? So yeah, that was definitely the trying to bring the Britishness into Star Wars universe. That was one thing, and the other thing was the villains, Dorota and Julan as well, because all of Aardman films and Star Wars, obviously, they've got really good villains. Yeah.
Of course. Yeah. With that kind of speeder race, that's like main chunk of the story, was there kind of like a big challenge to animate those vehicles?
Yeah, it was a huge challenge because they were quite big and heavy. We had to have two scales for the spaceships. So the smaller scale was for the race, but even though that they were small, they were still quite heavy. So they were heavily rigged, and it needed a lot of working out how, the way how we'd rig them on, how many, axes and how they are going to move. Then also the moment when Anni and Kalina go into the tunnel,
Yes.
it does feel like they are going and going and going through that tunnel, but we actually we had a big set, but it was quite a short set. So we had to, once the spaceship reached the end of one side, we had to move it again. So we had to
I
think
see.
about, yeah, some ways of, problem solving to make it all work. Yeah.
Um, Another great joy of the show is the creature design. I'm a big fan of the baby Wookiee who takes control of the one ship. Oh, that was great. So, do you have a favorite little character that was particularly fun to design in the Aardman style?
Yeah. I do love Baby Wookie as well. I think Baby Wookie deserves its own series, I think. And I did love Wookiees as well. Just, the student Wookie as well.
Yeah.
Who is my favorite? I also love that one.
Yes.
The droid. I mean, I've got to say, designing the main characters, that was huge pleasure. But Z1, that's a droid inspired by my sausage dog, my very first dog, called Zuzia. That's why Z1.
Ah, I see.
Um, yeah, and she was quite funny and cheeky, and she also, when she was getting quite excited, she couldn't hold her bladder, so that was meant to be, this droid one is malfunctioning as well, right? Like it's falling apart. It's a source of embarrassment. So it's not just the tugboat, that's this kind of flying caravan home type of thing, but Z1 as well, and the mom. So there is a lot there for Annie to be embarrassed. But
Yeah,
yeah.
the underwear falling from the skies,
Exactly.
particularly. Yeah,
Exactly. So actually, and the underwear, there is plenty of Easter eggs. Like pretty much every scene has some kind of double meaning or depth. So the underwear, that's inspired by Carrie Fisher speech. I think it was during the AFI Achievement Awards, where she talks about, actually there is underwear in space to look at. So that will have a watch. It is a brilliant speech. I love it. I watched it over and over again, and I really admire Carrie Fisher. So that was inspiration. Her speech was inspiration for the underwear.
that's so great. I've
There
got to
is
let you go, but
underwear in space. Yeah.
yeah. All right. So, yeah, one final question. So, I was lucky enough to see the show on the big screen at Star Wars Celebration. So, which was a really great experience for me just as a fan and as press. How was that for you being able to see the show on the big screen and feel the reaction in the room that day?
Yeah, watching this film with 4,000 people was absolutely incredible. And I really wonder if I will ever have that kind of experience in my life again. It's very unusual, and it was incredibly emotional. I did cry behind the scenes there, because just to feel this wave of laughs and gasps and reactions, and actually a few people also coming up to me afterwards and saying that they were very moved and they teared up at the end. Just to feel this emotion from that amount of people is something, I don't know, unforgettable. Yeah, it was like, an experience of my life, really.
Yeah, it was just this unbelievable experience at Star Wars Celebration, and yeah, this is such an incredible marriage between two studios that create such a great
Mm.
product. So, thank you for the great show, and thank you so much for talking to Squiggly today.
Thank you so much. It's my
Thank you.
pleasure. Really nice talking with you.